Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Pod TV Network. I'm Nick Pallavito. I'll be your moderator for today's presentation on medicine and science. And today we're going to be discussing something very important, which is the new developments that are affecting people with Alzheimer's disease and dementia. For people who don't know about this, it's a neurological disease, and that's about all I will discuss since I'm an attorney and I am not a medical professional. So with that, we're going to bring somebody who knows something about medicine, a board certified in internal medicine, who can help us wade through what the new developments that are taking place in the medical profession relating to Alzheimer's disease, dementia, and of course, your cognitive impairment that takes place when you get older. And that is none other than the famous person from Hawaii and the scuba diver from all over the world, Dr. Michael Patmos. Dr. Michael Patmos, welcome to your show, and hopefully you'll bring light into this cloud of darkness and this sea of ignorance which Americans face when it comes to some important topics such as Alzheimer's disease and dementia. So take it away.
Well, good morning, Nick, and thank you for the opportunity to be on the podcast again today. I was away the last couple of weeks, and I'm happy to be back to share some information with you and your viewers and your audience. And I certainly hope, my goal is always to shed light, not heat, on important medical topics. Now, in the spirit of full disclosure, I am not a neurologist, and I'm very passionate about doctors staying in their lane. When doctors opine as experts in areas in which they're not trained, that's called epistemic trespassing, and it is a form of unprofessional conduct. And we have a problem with that now. There are lots of doctors opining as experts about all kinds of things, including COVID, and they're spreading misinformation. They are not experts, and they should not be opining as experts. Everyone's entitled to their opinion, but you're not an expert unless you're trained in that specialty. I'm not a neurologist. I'm an internal medicine doctor and trained in infection control and hospital epidemiology. I do have a fair amount of neurology experience. I did 6 months of neurology as an internal medicine resident, and neurology is often a part of primary care, general internal medicine. We see lots of patients with neurodegenerative disorders, including Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's and Lewy body dementia and so forth. So primary care doctors, general internal medicine doctors do have some exposure to this, but we're not experts. So I just want to be upfront about that. So what I did is this morning to prepare for this is to do what all doctors should do. Refer to UpToDate to see what is in the latest medical literature, the current medical literature that is evidence-based, that is high-quality data. That's what's in UpToDate, and that's what doctors should be relying upon. So that's what I did today. So let me give you a rundown on what UpToDate has on Alzheimer's disease. First of all, Alzheimer's disease is exploding all over the world as we have an aging population. And it's referred to as the silver tsunami. It's a big problem in many, many areas of the world, especially in the United States, certain states where there's a lot of retirees, in Florida, Hawaii, and we are completely unprepared for this wave of elderly people with Alzheimer's disease. We don't have our healthcare system is not prepared to manage. These patients need long-term care, and we don't have nearly enough long-term care, Alzheimer's specialty hospitals and nursing homes and so forth. And it's a evolving catastrophe. The burden of care for Alzheimer's disease falls on family members if they're willing to take on that burden, or these patients just end up getting progressively worse and getting into bad situations like falls and then in nursing homes where they waste away unknown. It's a tragedy, and it's a shame that we're not better prepared for it. Well, having said that, there is some exciting news in the world of Alzheimer's disease. There is medication for Alzheimer's disease, and we don't really know the cause of it yet. It's probably largely genetic. It seems to be inherited, but not everybody who's elderly gets it. There are some people who are centenarians who have no sign of Alzheimer's disease, and other people get it in their 40s and 50s. So it's a variable disease. We don't know the cause of it, but it is associated with this observation on biopsy that the brain cells have deposits of what's called amyloid beta or beta amyloid in their cells. It's like a gunk that clogs up and affects the cells in the brain in these patients. Well, we have treatment now, and here's a quick thumbnail sketch of the treatment that's available today for Alzheimer's disease. The first treatment are the cholinesterase inhibitors, and these have been around for decades. What these drugs do is they kind of push up the level of acetylcholine in certain parts of the brain, which improves cognitive performance. It doesn't slow the progression of disease. You still end up in the same place eventually, but it does give a little bit of enhanced cognitive performance as measured on various tests for patients who take these cholinesterase inhibitors. And there's several of them. Donepezil is the name of one of the most popular ones, also called Aricept. Real doctors try not to use brand names. So donepezil is one that has been around for quite a while. There's another medicine called memantidine, which we don't know exactly how it works, but it's used in a little bit more advanced Alzheimer's disease, and sometimes these are used in combination. You have the cholinesterase inhibitor and memantidine together, and memantidine seems to also improve cognitive performance a little bit, though it doesn't appear to affect the long-term prognosis. Now, the biggest breakthrough of the last few years has been the development of monoclonal antibodies for Alzheimer's disease. These are antibodies, just like you get with a vaccine. This is not a vaccination, though, but it's an immunologic therapy. These are antibodies that are produced, pharmacologically, introduced into the body that are directed against the amyloid beta that collects in the brain cells. And these are exciting. There's 3 of them now. There's aducanumab, donanemab, and lecanemab. They have great names. You try to say them fast, and I trip over them. But they have brand names, but I don't use brand names. So these monoclonal antibodies are now very exciting because these drugs are these are antibodies directed against amyloid beta, and they seem to alter the course of Alzheimer's disease. The evidence is that that's accumulating is that they appear to slow down the progression by about 27 to 35%. So in other words, if the Alzheimer's disease progression is, say, on average 7 to 10 years, these drugs could stretch it out to 10 to 13 years. So they give you a little more time. So it's a very exciting breakthrough for a disease we don't know the cause of that's affecting tens of millions of people, elderly people around the world. And it's a very exciting breakthrough. You suggested this topic because of some news a couple of weeks ago about a new monoclonal antibody that got a lot of play in the mass media. I would suggest take that. Anything in the mass media is suspect. Doctors don't rely on information from the mass media or social media or Fox News. We have to rely on high quality information. Up to date is the best source for that. And so what I can tell you is that monoclonal antibodies are exciting. They offer a lot of hope and a lot of promise that we could actually make incremental progress with Alzheimer's disease. And together with the other medicines we have, improve cognitive performance and slow the progression of disease. But we don't have a cure for Alzheimer's disease. Let's be clear about that. There have been a number of medications touted for Alzheimer's disease that have failed miserably, and those are vitamin E. Very mixed results. Some studies suggested yes, most studies suggest it's really hard to detect a real benefit with vitamin E. Saligeline, another drug with unclear benefit, and then other drugs that have failed miserably are estrogens, nonsteroidals, ginkgo biloba, vitamin B, and omega-3 fatty acids. Many people have heard of these drugs for Alzheimer's. They say, I thought they worked. It's very similar to what we heard about with COVID, where false, things were said about ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine. They don't work for COVID, and these drugs don't work for Alzheimer's disease. So all in all, I think it's an exciting time for Alzheimer's disease research. And I think the future looks bright, much like in this situation with breast cancer, where we're making incremental progress and extending life. I think we're doing that with Alzheimer's disease. You have these cholinesterase inhibitors, memantidine, and now the monoclonal antibodies against amyloid beta. I think we're going to see patients with Alzheimer's disease live longer and hang on to their cognitive capabilities longer. I would love a permanent cure, but I don't see that on the horizon. And I think we have to be very careful that we don't overstate and in an unscientific way what the monoclonal antibodies promise. What they promise is, what they look like is they slow the progression of disease by about 30%. And that's great. And that's significant. Let's call that an exciting prospect for the future. So that's what I had. That's my input on Alzheimer's disease today. Good morning, Rick.
Good morning. So I'm not a doctor, so I can say whatever the heck I want without violating professional ethics. I've got bad news and I got good news. The bad news is that COVID looks like it may age your brain prematurely. And we've got maybe 20 million Americans with long COVID, symptoms that persist. And I saw one study, and one study's not enough, that a case of COVID bad enough to hospitalize ages your brain by 20 years. So we were already going to have a COVID explosion, but now it's going to be much worse. Now, the good news is there's stuff you can do, I think, right now without taking any drugs, and that is remaining mentally active. There's a famous study of nuns in a convent, and they say nuns in a convent live a long time, because they live a controlled life, and they found out that looking at these women who lived into their 90s, kept their wits about them when they remain mentally active, doing puzzles and just like doing stuff that keeps your brain nice, even when on autopsy they cut them open and found out that their brains were Swiss cheese with Alzheimer's.
Really?
So the deal is your brain has about 10 billion neurons. Each neuron has about 1,000 little fingers that reach out and connect to other neurons. The plaque, the amyloid, gets in there and it chokes off the neurons and eventually the connections and eventually the entire neurons. And if you've built a brain that's rich in connections, you can hold on to information even as those connections are being severed, because you've built so many paths, you got other ways to get to the information.
Rick, you are one smart guy. Let me tell you, I'm astonished how you always seem to be able to find an aspect to comment upon that I hadn't thought about. And you're right, absolutely right about the impact of COVID on cognitive performance, the damage that's done to people cognitively when they get COVID, and how that interacts with and relates to the Alzheimer's disease pandemic. Brilliant, astute comment as always, Rick. And you described the impact of amyloid beta on the synaptic connections between neurons. That's exactly what it does. Is it interferes with electrical transmission from one nerve cell to the next.
The amyloid is like barf. You kill a neuron and it falls apart, it explodes, it barfs up even more gunk.
Well, I wouldn't use that word, but you're pretty close to accurate there.
Well, Dr. Patmos, also when it comes to living longer, when I'm checking into Spain, obviously it's scheduled to move there on the 18th of September. But the other thing is life expectancy. Life expectancy in the United States was 77. In Spain, it was 84. Right. In other words, and I was kind of shocked. It was a lot. You're expected to live a lot longer if you move to Spain. And they said, well, it's the Mediterranean diet. It's the community. It's the way of life, which is totally different in the United States. The contributing factors for people that live longer. But there also may be an obesity aspects to it as well, because when we had to get Spanish insurance, I told them my weight, they fell out of their chair. I was going like, no, you weigh way too much. You got to lose weight. So there's other factors. But when it comes to Alzheimer's disease, if we don't cure that, as we have 10,000 people per day, turning age 65, are we going to run into a very serious problem in the United States where there is no really long-term care that's provided through Medicare, and you're going to have a lot of old people walking around like zombies? What's your thoughts?
We already do. Nick, we already do. This is already a problem. I can tell you, I know in Hawaii, for example, especially on Maui, we have a very severe shortage of long-term care capacity on Maui. We have a lot of retirees here. People come here when they're 60 and they're healthy and they're on the beach and they're retired. And then time goes by. Next thing you know, they're 90 and they're demented. They can't get back to the mainland. Their families can't take them back, and they suffer, they languish here on Maui and other Hawaiian islands with inadequate care. They end up in the hospital, sometimes sitting there for months or years with Alzheimer's disease, not needing to be in an acute care hospital, but just waiting for placement in a nursing home bed that there isn't any. It's called the wait list. It's a huge problem in Hawaii. We have, hundreds of patients sitting in the hospital with Alzheimer's disease, waiting for nursing home beds that we don't have. This is happening not just in Hawaii, it's happening in many states. So yes, the problem you just mentioned already exists. We already have a silver tsunami of Alzheimer's disease in this country.
And it's going to get worse. We have a comment from one of our viewers. They go, do you think diets and habits have a contributing factor in these diseases? If so, what can do to improve it?
I suspect there's some impact of diet and lifestyle, but I don't think we don't really understand the pathogenesis of Alzheimer's disease on a molecular biochemical level. So it's hard to say for sure. I mean, diet and lifestyle factors contribute to everything. So I think there's probably a role for that. But as far as blaming it on diet and lifestyle, I don't think that we don't know what causes Alzheimer's.
Well, when you get
Hey, Dr. Peppermint, I'm just popping in. I'm one of the producers, and I have a quick question for you because it's something that came up on one of our news shows, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about it and everything. I'm wondering how many people are living in environments that are contributing to Alzheimer's and things like that, but are not aware of the environments that they're living in, because I know a number of people have asbestos in their homes, they have mold in their homes, and they have a number of other factors that could be contributing to the mental health of them as well. But I just wanted your thoughts on that, because a lot of times I know you can get those test kits that can show you how your home is doing in terms of health, but a lot of people don't have those, and a lot of people don't bother to deal with those. But I just wanted your take on that.
Okay, so there are many, Alzheimer's disease is one disease. There's lots of diseases, lots of dementing disorders, from Parkinson's disease, Lewy body dementia, vascular dementia. There's all sorts of dementing illnesses. Syphilis gives you a dementia. And there's certainly a role for occupational exposures and environmental exposures and various illnesses. So just in general terms, you're on the right track with that. But again, with respect to specifically about Alzheimer's disease, we don't know the cause of it.
So when your brain doesn't have enough oxygen, it makes you act like you're drunk. And like my grandpa had cardiac insufficiency. He'd had heart attacks and stuff. In the last years of his life, his brain wasn't getting enough oxygen, and his personality eroded. He turned from a nice guy into a less nice guy. So I would guess in terms of health, if the nuns in the convent, they ate healthy. They had no choice. So I assume if you do get in shape and you can deliver oxygen and other nutrients to your brain, it will overall function better, even with some Alzheimer's, than otherwise.
Hey, Dr. Peppermint, along those same lines, and it's kind of coming back to what Rick was saying and everything, because I do have some family members that have it in my family as well, including some that have passed on, like a great aunt, and some others that have been dealing with that. So I was just wondering, how much do we need to be concerned if it is hereditarily in your family? Because like I said, I do have a aunt that was very much a great aunt that was very much in that dementia space. And even to what Rick was saying, I do remember that in the latter years, she would get confused and would bring up people that were no longer in the planet and had gone out and were not longer, getting people confused as to their identity and all along those lines. But I just wanted your thoughts around the hereditary aspect.
That's a very good question, Mark. Outstanding question. There is good evidence that, at least at some level, Alzheimer's disease has a genetic, it tends to run in families, and there seems to be a genetic predisposition. Exactly how that happens, we don't know, but there's something in the gene in our genes that increases the risk. So there is a genetic role to that. There are some tests that can be done that tell you if you have a certain gene. We know about a gene that is associated with Alzheimer's disease, and you can be tested for that gene. And if you have it, it's a marker, but it doesn't mean you're necessarily going to get Alzheimer's disease. It just means you have this genetic marker, and it's a real ethical dilemma because, would you want to know at 20 that you have this gene? Do you want your life insurance company to know at 40 that you have this gene? This is a major legal, ethical dilemma, but we are entering the world now of medicine where we can use genetics to understand risk and even to predict the future.
So just because you have Alzheimer's doesn't mean you're done, doesn't mean you're thrown away. There's a famous screenwriter, David Milch. He created NYPD Blue. He created Deadwood. Diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 2015. He still managed to write and produce the Deadwood movie by 2019. He had a crew of people around him helping him remember stuff and helping him, form his thoughts. So he wrote a whole freaking movie. And then to top it off, 7 years after being diagnosed, he published his autobiography. There've been articles on how he has a team of people working with him to keep, to supply the missing pieces of his thoughts. And I think we'll see more of that people with Alzheimer's often hit the Post-it note stage. They're still living on their own, but the family comes in, they put Post-it notes on everything, helping them remember, how to do everything. And I think with AI and with our phones, we will get people who are able to function better and better, even with Alzheimer's.
That's a great point, Rick. You're making the point about where your starting point matters. If you're starting at a very high level and you decline 10%, you're still smarter than the average person. Rick, if you ever got Alzheimer's disease, you could get pretty far along and you'd still be smarter than Donald Trump.
Well, he's lazy. He's a good example of what not to do. He doesn't like to read. So you got to read your butt off. You got to work on just maintaining mental function.
Yeah, in the chess playing community, they said that they don't run into chess players that have Alzheimer's disease, but usually if you're a really good player and you have Alzheimer's disease, you wouldn't be playing in a tournament anyway. But that's a whole another story. We do have some comments also that have come in by some of our viewers. They want to know, how do we get this treatment? And those treatments, can they be used as preventative or prophylactic? What is your thoughts on that?
Well, hi, Kimberly. I think that's a great question. I would, as a physician, my recommendation is to consult with your physician, or if you know anyone who has concerns, they should consult with their physician. If the physician is not up to date on this subject, then they should be referred to a neurologist who specializes in the treatment of dementia. To the best of my understanding as a non-neurologist, there's no role for using monoclonal antibodies or cholinesterase inhibitors or memantidine as prophylaxis. I think the best prophylaxis for Alzheimer's disease is a healthy lifestyle, stay active, and do as Rick said, take up the piano, do something that stimulates your brain. There is an interesting observation that was made. Perfectly healthy people put in an environment where they're held captive and denied any stimulation, sound, light, and so forth, they actually start to develop a dementia just from not being stimulated. The brain requires stimulation. I think the best prevention for Alzheimer's disease is keep your brain stimulated, keep active, keep doing things, learning things, reading, learning new things, take up the piano, just do something to keep your brain working.
So going into these shows actually does help us then, because it's forcing me to learn things that I don't know very much about. Would that be correct? In other words,
the best things you can do when you get older and you retire is take up a hobby that you have to learn something new, whatever it might be. I told my patients for years, take up the piano. You're stimulating both sides of your brain. I think that's the kind of thing that does help. The worst thing you can do is just sit there and watch TV, especially if you're watching Fox News.
I played Words with friends for years until the app got really bad. But there are plenty of word games like Wordle that take like 5 minutes a day, but it's a little puzzle to work your way through.
Yeah.
All right, so that makes sense. Now, what about? It sounds to me though that these drugs that are coming out, they may slow down the progression of the disease, but they don't cure the disease, nor do they roll back the problems that you have with the disease. Would that be correct?
I think that's a fair statement. Again, I'm not an authority on this. I'm relying on what I found in UpToDate. But my understanding as an internal medicine doctor is that the cholinesterase inhibitors transiently improve performance and the monoclonal antibodies slow progression. I don't know of anything that reverses Alzheimer's disease. That would be a great thing.
Yeah. Okay. So now we're looking at one of our prospective elected officials that seems to have neurological problems. Would these medicines help him or not, or what? Or is this going to be just a road down?
Okay, so I have to say that, you know,
Notice I said no names.
it is considered unprofessional conduct for a physician to diagnose a public figure without having examined them. So I'm not making any diagnosis on the president of the United States, but and I can't offer any advice on treatment. But it's obvious to everyone that there's something going on, and I hope he's getting appropriate medical care. And I will leave it up to the public to decide what to do about that.
Yeah. So if you do suspect a family member has neurological issues, would a good thing to do is not wait and go seek medical help immediately? Would that be the best?
You know, that's a great point. One of the problems with patients with Alzheimer's disease in particular is they have a tremendous denial. They don't see their decline. Everybody around them sees it. They don't see it. There's something about Alzheimer's disease that causes inability to perceive your own denial, your own decline. There's a tremendous denial about it. Patients with Alzheimer's disease will say, "I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with me." What did you say? You know, they don't see it. Whereas other kinds of memory loss patients will say, I'm forgetting stuff. If you're aware of your decline, you don't have Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease patients are not aware of what's going on around them, and everybody else sees it. And so getting them into a neurologist's office to have a mini mental status exam, the proper evaluation, and on to treatment can give them more years of quality life before they apparently eventually end up in the same place anyway.
So if you look at Biden, and I'm not a doctor, so I can say whatever the heck, he has a stutter. B, it seems like he has a problem with sentence construction, that he's got an idea in his head, and then as he builds the sentence to say it, he gets things tangled up, which is not Alzheimer's. It's the grandma thing of like calling one kid by the other kid's name. He seems to have a command of the facts. It's constructing the sentences that's tough for him.
Yeah. I think the things that are obvious to anyone is that he has bradykinesia, he has postural instability, falling, forward stoop, and some rigidity. So you see bradykinesia, rigidity, and postural instability. Those are, classic observations. I'll leave it up to his doctors to make the diagnosis.
Hold on. The White House has denied the diagnosis that generally goes with those symptoms, and they do say, "What's pins and needles
paresthesias?"
Well, they say he's got pins and needles in his feet.
Yeah, that's called paresthesias. It's neuropathy.
Neuropathy, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people have neuropathy as you get older.
Yeah, one of our commentators want to know, Jack Donovan, is there a place where you can find treatments, a website, a link?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. The place for the lay public, for physicians, you go to UpToDate. For the lay public, all the great academic medical centers, Harvard, Mayo Clinic, UCSF, Stanford, Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center in Boston. These are the meccas of medical education. This is where the experts are. These are the experts we should be turning to for all of our information, including this and COVID, not to somebody on Fox News who came out of nowhere, but to the experts at our major academic medical centers. They all have websites, and those websites all have information. So I would say if you're the leading places for evaluation of neurodegenerative disorders in this country are Mayo Clinic. UCSF has got a fantastic department of for Alzheimer's disease and other neurodegenerative disorders. And of course, you can never count out the famous, the House of God, Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center in Boston.
And you don't go to the Joe Rogan Experience, I assume.
Comedians.
We'll have to forget Joe Rogan Experience. Go with real people who know what they're doing. Well, I thank Dr. Patmos and, of course, our viewers in the United States and around the world with medicine and science. And we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Peace.